Is it time for One Piece to stop doing this? There is one thing in this story, you might not be consciously aware of it, but it's the secret ingredient for almost every arc in the series, and a key reason why One Piece is so gripping, satisfying, and honestly, a little bit addictive. And it's very simple. It's a countdown. A device used in almost every arc when Oda says something like, there's X minutes until Y outcome. And on Egghead Island, we've been given our most recent countdown, which has resulted in the following reaction.
This trope has happened time and time again, and I don't know why people are still defending it. I don't understand why so many One Piece fans are just so blinded and just want to be like, nope, everything is good. Oda's writing the best story ever. There's no problems. Everything's fine. Everything's okay. Everything's amazing. It's not. Like, can we just acknowledge it so then we can get actual good chapters moving on? I feel like the One Piece fandom as a whole, it just sucks right now. I really don't enjoy interacting with it.
Now, to be fair, I think there's a bit more behind this reaction than just the time limit. But again, to continue being fair, he's not the only one who reacted like this. Let's face it, the time limit is a well-worn trope. Whether we have 6 days before the execution of Podcast Ace, 1 hour before the birdcage closes on Dressrosa, 30 minutes until the Buster Call arrives in Isobe, or 5 minutes until Onigashima destroys the Flower Capital. No matter what it is, we have seen Oda employ the countdown trope over and over and over and over again. And we will see him continue to employ it for every major arc until One Piece ends. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I would actually argue that if you took this one simple device away from One Piece, then the series would suffer irrevocable damage as a result. There's a reason why Oda keeps doing this, and it's not lazy writing. In fact, it's very much the opposite. It's about maximizing the impact of his writing with everything he can. So to really get into this, we have to begin with the idea that clocks don't operate in a vacuum, which is a strange sentence to say. On their own though, countdowns are meaningless. And the countdown only forms one layer in our delicious fictional pirate lasagna, layer 4 to be precise. These are Eiichiro Oda's 5 layers of tension in One Piece. This is the secret, but also not so secret if you're paying attention formula, that has elevated One Piece from all of its shonen contemporaries across multiple generations now. Every modern One Piece arc has these 5 elements that work together to create an exceptional sense of tension, with the first layer of tension being immediate danger to our main characters. This is obviously extremely basic and common to all battle manga, and it's created when our protagonists directly face danger. It should be noted that One Piece has almost no arcs that involve just this singular layer alone. Although one example I can think of is Long Ring Longland, because that was a completely isolated incident of the Straw Hat Pirates versus the Foxy Pirates. And with that in mind, it's probably fair to say that Long Ring Longland is the One Piece arc with by far the least amount of tension. The second layer of tension is immediate danger to innocent people that the crew have met. In this case, the crew are no longer just fighting for themselves, and what we have is a character, or characters plural, who often form the emotional core. A basic example would be the fight with Alvida during Romance Dawn. There, our second layer of tension was the fact that we needed to save Kobe, and Oda very often uses children in this role, with other examples being Tama and Toko. Children are great because they're just such an easy way to trigger the protective mechanisms in humans. Children are of course also very thematically important in One Piece. It's a series about generational shift, and children represent the dreams of the future. But Oda does switch it up a bit. Like say on Little Garden, when we had the exact opposite of children, there the second layer of tension was fighting for Dory and Broggy, 2 super strong giant men who had lived for over a century. Meanwhile, the third layer of tension is the immediate danger to the environment around our main characters, also known as the Doomsday Device. This threatens not just our main characters and not just our second layer characters, but everyone within the zone in which the arc is taking place. And almost every post-time skip arc in One Piece features the Doomsday Device, but they were also quite prominent pre-time skip as well, such as the Bomb on Alabasta, Enel's Arc Maxim on Skypiea, the Buster Call, and etc. And the reason why this layer keeps working so well for One Piece is because it acts as a multiplier effect on the second layer of tension. It's like saying, you know this one character that we're fighting for? Well, now that we have this Doomsday scenario, we've got thousands of that character who are going to die if we don't stop it. And obviously the Doomsday Device also allows Oda to create these brilliant spectacle pieces. Some of the most iconic imagery in One Piece comes from these, like the birdcage slowly closing in on Dressrosa, or that terrifying image of the gas spreading throughout Punk Hazard, or even Noah threatening to crush Fishman Island, stuff like that. And now we arrive at the subject of this video, which is the fourth layer of tension, the countdown to Doomsday. where what we do is place a time limit on the execution of that third layer. The countdown doesn't add a new form of danger in and of itself, but it amplifies the existing danger by telling us exactly when it's going to happen. For example, if I told you that you were going to die, you'd probably shrug that off and say, yeah, eventually, it's what we all do. But if I were to tell you that you have an hour left to live, then you're probably going to have a much more intense reaction. Time pressure in general is a universal feeling. On some level, we all understand the intensity that this can add to any sector of your life, no matter how mundane. Like if you have a job interview one morning but miss your alarm. So you wake up and you've got 20 minutes to do what would normally take you an hour, and even though it isn't anything particularly difficult, you still feel that pressure. So just being aware of time is a whole separate layer of tension in and of itself. But there's also more to it than that. Above all else, the countdown is about asserting control. Whoever the main villain of an arc just so happens to be isn't simply threatening our main characters, our side characters, or their home. The villain is threatening their time sovereignty. At every step of the way, the antagonist is in control, and setting these time limits makes them seem so much more threatening and so much more competent. The fact that Doflamingo created the birdcage is one thing, but the fact that he set a time limit of 1 hour until its complete closure is another, because he is now controlling both your freedom and your time. Now, there is also a fifth layer of tension in One Piece being legacy, the idea that if we don't do the thing, then we will have failed the inherited will of someone who died to put us in this position. For example, on Fishman Island, if we don't stop Hody Jones, then we lose everything that both Otohime and Fisher Tiger worked, suffered, and were martyred for. That's a particularly fun layer because you don't necessarily see it in a lot of stories. And I don't know why, because it's another very easy thing that just amplifies them. But those are the 5 layers of Eiichiro Oda's story lasagna. Though I think the metaphor would work a little bit better if legacy was the first layer because it's underneath everything. But here's an arc-specific example of how the layering works. During Wano, the first layer of tension is obviously the Straw Hats. They're on a hostile island and we ideally want them to survive. Great. Then our second layer would be our close Wano allies, Kinemon, Momonosuke, and all of the rest. There's a lot in this arc, including Toko and Tama, of course. But it's that group of characters that forms the emotional core of Wano. The third layer of tension is that this nasty fish dragon, Kaido, is going to drop a big ol' island on the flower capital, which is going to kill thousands of Kinemons, Tamas, and Tokos. Then we have the fourth layer being that we have exactly 15 minutes to stop Kaido, his crew, and all of the other problems before Onigashima reaches the flower capital. And finally, we have the fifth layer, which is that if we fail, then we waste the legacy of Kozuki Oden, Toki, and Yasu, the figures who gave their lives to put us in this position. And when you think about all 5 layers, the fourth one is by far the easiest to achieve. You don't need to worry about creating compelling characters, drama, action spectacles, or hard-hitting flashbacks. All you need to do is say, and all of this stuff is gonna happen in this amount of minutes. Setting a clock is probably one of the most overpowered devices in all of storytelling because it takes very little creativity and basic logistical ability to keep track of everything. But the dividend it pays for that tiny investment is tremendous. With that said, you do still need to do it correctly. The fact that it's an easy device to use doesn't mean that authors will always employ it well. And also, it's not quite as simplistic as I've made it sound. So to illustrate in One Piece, Eiichiro Oda actually has 2 types of clocks that he uses across arcs. The first is the very funny sounding hard clock, funny because it sounds like I'm referring to a penis, but this is where Oda puts an exact time limit on an event occurring. We've talked a lot about these already, so I'm not going to go into every instance in One Piece where one of these has been used, but for a couple we haven't spoken about, on Skypiea from the very beginning, Enel's survival game is given a time limit of 3 hours. We don't know what's going to happen after that 3 hours is up, but it's not good, and Enel gives us periodic updates of exactly where the time stands right down to the final minutes. And another great example is on Thriller Bark, where after having their shadow stolen, the Straw Hats have until dawn to defeat Gecko Moria and get them back, which is also probably the closest call in all of One Piece, given that Zoro, Sanji, Robin, and Luffy all literally lose their heads right before getting their shadows back. Should also note that Thriller Bark has a sub countdown as well, where Luffy is given access to his nightmare form but is warned that he will only have 10 minutes to use it, so he has a very short time to get the job done. And I'd also like to point out that the entire Paramount War saga has a hard clock applied to it, as Amazon, Lily, Impel Down, and Marineford are all framed by the countdown to the execution of Ace. And I think that the final saga might have a similar framing device as well. A much grander countdown to some sort of unspeakably bad event that spans a few arcs. But along with your classic examples of Alabasta, Enisobi, Dressrosa, Wano, you get the idea, Oda loves to set a hard clock. And the fact that almost every major saga conflict ends with a countdown is definitely something that Oda has used to the point of being a very predictable trope in his writing. But time doesn't always have to be restricted so clinically, because Oda also frequently makes use of soft clocks, which are designed to give a more vague idea of time, where we know that something bad is going to happen, and look, we know it's going to happen soon, but we don't have an exact measure. Oftentimes we need to pick up on environmental clues. Like on Fishman Island, we don't have a countdown, but we sure as crap do see how close Noah is continuously getting to the island. Or for a more subdued example, we can also look at Little Garden. During this arc, Zoro, Vivi, and Nami get caught in the waxed candelabra and are put on a soft clock where no time limit is ever given other than soon, but we have a sense of time passing because we can see the wax gradually covering more and more of them. And these countdowns can also get a little bit more abstract. Like on Whole Cake Island, where Sanji had to bake a cake to stop Big Mom before she caught up to and killed the Straw Hats, as well as everyone else in her sight. We never had a hard time set on when that was going to happen, but the danger grew more and more palpable with every second that passed and the closer the Big Mom got to the Sunny. Although there was also a hard clock element, where Luffy had to beat Katakuri and meet up with the Straw Hats by a certain time. But often in the post-time skip era, Oda mixes both hard and soft clocks together, and Punk Hazard would be a great example of that. The third layer of tension here was the Shinokuni gas, which was gradually infiltrating each Punk Hazard building, and we got frequent visual updates of how far the gas had spread, along with some time-specific updates, like when Building B was given a 20-minute clock. There are very, very few arcs in One Piece that do not involve Oda's time pressure device. Some notable exceptions are most of the East Blue Saga because, well, Oda had yet to invent the device, as well as non-typical transition arcs like Return to Sabadi, Jaya, Zo, or The Reverie. And again, I'd also throw Long Ring Longland in there as well. That was a very non-typical arc because that's when One Piece turned into a gag manga for one volume, so there's no real need to add time pressure. And in fact, Oda actively took away time pressure by giving the antagonist a devil fruit with the ability to slow time down, which I think is such a perfect illustration of tension and intensity. Whenever Oda wants to get down to some very serious business, he puts 10 minutes on the clock and makes all of his characters fight against it. But whenever he wants to screw around and have fun, he finds a way to give them even more time than should be scientifically possible, which now finally brings us back to Egghead Island. Currently, we have been given yet another clock. This time it's a 10-minute wait until Vegapunk reveals the various truths of the world, which was met with a little bit of online backlash as we've explored. But I find that really weird. In all of my time as a One Piece fan, which because I'm old is a lot, this is the first time I've heard complaints about the countdown system. And they've come at the weirdest possible time because Egghead Island is a complete subversion of the trope. In this case, instead of putting pressure on the protagonist, the clock is now working against the antagonists. And remember what I said about control. On Egghead Island, the antagonists are not in control because we, the protagonists, have set the clock. What we've done in this situation is take time sovereignty away from the world government. We have ripped the Five Elders down from their position at Marijois and forced them into engaging on our terms. It's a really fun reversal of the trope. They have 10 minutes to stop us or else they lose everything. And it also gives us a win condition without having to defeat the Five Elders right here and now. Because at the end of every other clock, we have a defeated antagonist, either unconscious, on the floor, or bathing in magma, or whatever they prefer. But with Egghead Island, Oda is potentially taking the opportunity to break with his traditional formula and give us a way of winning without having to go through all of the standard beats of physically beating the bad guys. So we're using the same device in a new way, which I personally find very exciting. However, someone did reply to me on Twitter with a very interesting comment about this. Throwing a new coat of paint onto my wall doesn't make it not the same wall. It could make it look new and fresh, but it's really just the same wall. And I honestly think that this comment could not have summed up things any better. I actually agree with him. So I replied, "So are you suggesting that we find an alternative to walls, or is there a very good reason why we still use them? I don't know about you guys, but I am a big fan of my walls. And stories have walls too because they're still structures, just non-physical structures, and each author has their preferred building style. And when it comes to Oda, time consciousness is one of his walls. If you remove that wall, then One Piece, look, it still works. The structure isn't going to completely fall, it just doesn't work as well. It won't be anywhere near as strong. So for example, let's see what happens if you remove the clock. Let's take any Sobby. Spandam accidentally uses the golden Den Mushi because he's a bit of a prick and summons a boss to call. But in this case, the audience are not going to be told that the ships will be here in 30 minutes. So as an audience, immediately, we no longer have as powerful of a sense of impending doom because we don't know how long we have. It could take minutes, hours, maybe even a day. There's no hard clock to tell us. And there's also no soft clock that we can keep visual track of because it's one of two things. The ships are either here or they're not. It's only through knowing that we have exactly 30 minutes till Doomsday that it makes it feel like every action taken by the crew counts. Victories feel more earned and mistakes feel infinitely more costly. like Usopp and Zoro accidentally getting handcuffed together. That's bad enough on its own. But the fact that they've done this with less than half an hour to solve this new problem before solving their existing problem just continues to stack tension upon tension. And I'd also argue that this is why One Piece works very well to both binge and read weekly. Because even though you could be reading the events of 15 minutes over the course of half a year, every chapter, every week, still comes with that time awareness, that desperation, and that added layer of drama. Whereas a lot of other shonen series don't make use of this device and can really start to feel drawn out and exhausting because it feels like it's taking these characters hours, days, weeks, or even months to accomplish what should be a not that long of a task. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen in One Piece as well. There's always points during these countdowns where you're like, so Onigashima was supposed to fall in 15 minutes, but that was 6 months ago, huh? But I would much prefer that to the alternative where we have no time awareness at all. So look, I get where Roger's base was coming from. The countdown is something that Oda uses again and again and again, and it is something that he's going to keep using again and again and again. Same way I keep using the words again and again and again. But I'm okay with that because the countdown works. And I think that the core structure of One Piece arcs would feel pretty lacking without it. Just as your core viewing of One Piece material on YouTube would feel pretty lacking without subscribing to this channel, which would grant you consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.